The massive crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with nervous energy as representatives from hundreds of species gathered for an emergency session. The translucent walls pulsed with soft blue light, reflecting the anxiety rippling through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Zethkura of the Vraxian Empire adjusted her breathing apparatus nervously, her 6 eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of the human delegation. "They cannot be serious about this," whispered Council Member Thylos, his serpentine body coiled tightly around his floating platform. The Nagan diplomat's scales had shifted to a deep purple, betraying his fear despite his attempt at composure. Surely the humans understand the consequences of defying a council directive. The air grew thick with tension as holographic displays around the chamber flickered to life, showing the aftermath of what would later be known as the Kepler Station incident. The space station, once a thriving trade hub serving as neutral ground between the Terran Federation and the HFY Collective, now drifted as twisted metal and debris through the void. 3 days ago, the station had housed over 50,000 beings from dozens of species. Now it was a graveyard, and the images being broadcast showed the devastating efficiency with which it had been destroyed. What made the footage even more disturbing was the clinical precision of the attack. Every weapon system had been surgically removed, every escape pod had been allowed to launch, and every civilian section had been evacuated before the military sections were systematically obliterated. High Counselor Vexthera, the ancient Etherian who had presided over the council for over 2 centuries, materialized at the center of the chamber. Her translucent form shimmered with barely contained energy as she addressed the assembly. "We are here to discuss the unprecedented response from the Terran Federation regarding our recent trade sanctions and territorial restrictions. They had been welcomed initially with the same patronizing tolerance shown to all newcomers, expected to quietly accept their place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy, while the established powers continued their ancient games of politics and resource control." Ambassador Chun Wei-Lin of the Terran Federation sat in the human delegation area, her face and mask of calm professionalism. Unlike the agitated movements of the other delegates, she remained perfectly still, hands folded on the table before her. Her 2 human companions, Military Liaison Colonel Sarah Rodriguez and Trade Representative Dr. James Okafor, flanked her with equally serene expressions. The humans destroyed Kepler Station without any formal declaration of hostilities, Councillor Thekmore of the Hegemony Alliance stated, his massive frame shaking with indignation. This action violated at least 17 interstellar laws and countless treaties. They must be held accountable for this unprovoked aggression. Ambassador Chen finally stood, her movements so smooth and controlled that it seemed to command the attention of the entire chamber without effort. The conversations died away as she activated her translation matrix and spoke in perfectly measured tones. "Councillor Thekmore raises an interesting point about unprovoked aggression," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "I wonder if he would care to explain how the systematic blockade of 17 human colonies, the seizure of 43 human vessels in neutral space, and the recent accident that destroyed the human medical transport carrying vaccines to the Proxima outbreak zone constitute anything other than acts of war." The chamber erupted in heated discussions as various delegates attempted to justify their recent actions. For months, an alliance of the Council's more established members had been implementing increasingly harsh restrictions on human expansion and trade. They called it integration guidance, designed to help humanity better understand their place in galactic society. The truth was simpler and more cruel. Humanity's rapid technological advancement and aggressive expansion had made several senior council members nervous. In just 12 years, humans had established colonies and systems that other species had taken decades to even survey. Their military technology, while still inferior to the most advanced civilizations, had progressed at an alarming rate. Most concerning of all was their apparent immunity to the political manipulations and social pressures that kept most species in line. The restrictions were implemented for the good of galactic stability, High Counselor Vexthera interjected. Humanity's rapid expansion has disrupted established trade routes and territorial agreements that have maintained peace for centuries. Chen smiled, and Somehow that expression was more unsettling than any display of anger would have been. Stability. Yes, we've come to understand how much the Council values stability. The question before us today is whether the Council values that stability more than it values survival. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Colonel Rodriguez stood and activated a holographic display that showed current fleet positions throughout the local galactic arm. Red dots representing human ships were scattered across hundreds of systems, far more than most delegates had realized. 3 days ago, you believed you were dealing with an upstart species that could be pressured into compliance through economic warfare and strategic intimidation, Shin continued. Today, I'm here to inform you that you have been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about both human nature and human capabilities. The holographic display shifted to show detailed schematics of Kepler Station. The precision of the attack became even more apparent as the presentation highlighted exactly how each system had been targeted. The humans hadn't simply destroyed the station. They had performed a masterful demonstration of surgical military capability. The medical transport that suffered its accident was carrying experimental vaccines that represented 18 months of research, Dr. Okafor added, standing to address the chamber. 237 human children died in the Proxima outbreak because those vaccines never arrived. The station served as the primary logistics hub for the blockade, preventing replacement medical supplies from reaching our colonies. The implications began to sink in. The humans hadn't lashed out in blind rage. They had carefully selected a target that would demonstrate their capabilities while simultaneously crippling the infrastructure being used to strangle their colonies. Moreover, the clinical precision of the attack suggested intelligence gathering capabilities that most council members had never suspected. This is madness, Counselor Thyvanna of the Celestial Protectorate declared, her crystalline form pulsing with agitation. No single species can challenge the collective authority of the Galactic Council. The combined fleets of our members number in the hundreds of thousands of vessels. Chen turned to face the celestial delegate directly. Counselor Thyvanna makes an excellent point about numbers. Perhaps she would like to explain why 17 Protectorate listening posts went dark simultaneously approximately 6 hours ago, or why her government's primary military shipyard is currently experiencing what I believe your reports are calling cascading system failures. The chamber fell completely silent. The implications were staggering. If the humans were capable of coordinated strikes across multiple systems while maintaining their diplomatic presence at the Council, then the intelligence failure was far worse than anyone had imagined. High Counselor Vexthara's form flickered with what might have been uncertainty. Are you threatening the Council, Ambassador Chen? I'm providing information, High Counselor. Whether you choose to interpret factual statements as threats says more about your mindset than mine. Chen activated another holographic display showing what appeared to be a star map with numerous flashing indicators. These represent ongoing accidents and system failures affecting infrastructure belonging to any government that has participated in the sanctions against humanity. The scope of the coordinated operation was becoming clear. While the Council had been congratulating itself on successfully pressuring the newcomers, the humans had been systematically mapping and targeting the infrastructure of their opponents. The attack on Kepler Station hadn't been an isolated incident of retaliation. It had been the opening move in a campaign that had already been underway for hours. Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward, her military bearing unmistakable even to alien observers. The Terran Federation military operates under strict rules of engagement. We have taken every possible measure to minimize casualties while targeting only military and infrastructure assets directly involved in the blockade of human space. We have honored our commitments to protect civilian populations and maintain humanitarian corridors. However, she continued, her voice carrying a subtle edge that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Our patience with attempts to starve human colonies into submission has reached its limit. The medical transport incident has been classified by our government as a war crime. Our response will be proportional to the threat level presented. The mathematical precision of the human response was perhaps more terrifying than raw aggression would have been. They had demonstrated the capability to strike at will across multiple systems while simultaneously maintaining perfect diplomatic protocol. It suggested a level of strategic planning and resource coordination that challenged fundamental assumptions about their technological and organizational capabilities. Ambassador Chun returned to her seat with the same fluid motion she had used when standing. The Terran Federation came to this council seeking peaceful integration and mutual cooperation. We have consistently attempted to resolve disputes through diplomatic channels. The recent escalation has forced us to reevaluate our approach to galactic politics. What exactly are you proposing? High Counselor Vexthera asked, her ancient voice carrying undertones of something that might have been respect for the first time in the session. Nothing at all, High Counselor. We are simply informing the Council that the era of treating humanity as a junior partner to be managed and controlled has ended. How you choose to proceed from this point will determine whether our future relationship is characterized by mutual respect or mutual destruction. The holographic displays faded, leaving the chamber in relative darkness. In that moment, every delegate understood that they were witnessing a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics. The humans had not simply retaliated against aggression. They had announced their arrival as a major power in terms that no one could misunderstand. The emergency session that was supposed to address human aggression had instead become a demonstration of human capabilities. As delegates began filing out of the chamber in hushed conversations, the real question was no longer whether humanity could be controlled, but whether anyone was prepared for the consequences of trying. The emergency council session had ended 12 hours ago, but the aftershocks were still rippling through every major government in the galaxy. In the luxurious private quarters aboard the Vraxian dreadnought Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kethvar reviewed the latest intelligence reports with growing unease. The crystalline displays floating before his command throne showed a tactical situation that defied everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. The simultaneous strikes across 47 systems suggest coordination capabilities we never suspected, his intelligence chief, Commander Vexthal, reported with obvious reluctance. Our estimates of human fleet strength were apparently off by several orders of magnitude. The Admiral's 6 eyes focused independently on different sections of the tactical display. Red markers indicated confirmed human vessels, while yellow showed suspected positions, and orange marked locations where human activity had been detected but ships had vanished before positive identification could be made. The pattern was deeply disturbing. How is this possible? Admiral Kethvar demanded, his breathing apparatus hissing with agitation. Our intelligence networks have been monitoring human expansion for over a decade. Where did they hide this fleet? The answer, when it came, was even more unsettling than the mystery had been. Commander Vexthal activated a detailed analysis showing human ship construction and deployment patterns. Sir, we believe they didn't hide a fleet. They built one. Our analysis suggests that human industrial capacity has been vastly underestimated. The implications were staggering. While the established galactic powers had spent decades engaged in political maneuvering and resource disputes, humanity had apparently been engaged in a massive military and industrial buildup. The ships that had struck across multiple systems weren't ancient vessels kept in reserve. They were new constructions using technology that had evolved rapidly beyond galactic intelligence estimates. Meanwhile, in the secured communications center of the Hegemony Alliance flagship, Counselor Thekmore was discovering that the crisis was far worse than the public session had revealed. The massive alien's bulk filled the command chamber as he reviewed damage reports from across Alliance space. 17 military installations hit simultaneously, his aide reported, mandibles clicking nervously. All strikes were precisely targeted to disable rather than destroy completely. No casualties among personnel, but our defensive capabilities in those sectors have been reduced by 60%. Thekmore's compound eyes processed the tactical data with practiced efficiency. They're sending a message. They could have killed everyone in those installations, but they chose not to. This isn't random aggression. This is calculated psychological warfare. The realization was perhaps more frightening than straightforward destruction would have been. The humans were demonstrating not just the capability to strike at will, but the restraint to limit their attacks to military targets. It suggested a level of strategic thinking that positioned them as potential equals rather than the junior species most council members had assumed them to be. On the distant frontier world of Kepler 4, The human colony that had been under blockade for the past 3 months was experiencing its first supply delivery in weeks. The massive cargo vessels that landed weren't flying Terran Federation flags. However, they bore the insignia of the Neutral Traders Consortium, one of the few galactic organizations that maintained strict political independence. Colonial Administrator Sarah Martinez watched the unloading operations with a mixture of relief and curiosity. The medical supplies alone would save hundreds of lives, but the presence of consortium vessels suggested political developments beyond simple humanitarian aid. Administrator Martinez called Captain Jinthara of the consortium vessel Prophet's Edge. The Zeltronian trader's scaled hide showed the subtle color patterns that indicated respectful concern. I bring greetings from the consortium board and urgent information regarding recent developments in council space. Martinez gestured for the captain to join her in the colony's administrative center, away from the busy landing field. The building's simple human architecture contrasted sharply with the elegant curves of Zeltronian design philosophy, but both species had learned to appreciate practical functionality over aesthetic preferences. The blockade has been lifted, Captain Jinthara reported without preamble. All council forces have withdrawn to positions at least 5 parsecs from any human colony world. The official statement cites strategic repositioning for enhanced regional security, but our sources suggest the withdrawal was somewhat less voluntary than that implies. Martinez felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. What changed? Last week, the council was threatening to expand the blockade to include essential medical supplies. The Zeltronian trader's hide shifted to patterns indicating complex emotions. Your government's response to the Kepler station situation has apparently convinced the council that continued escalation would be inadvisable. The Traders Consortium has received emergency requests for industrial and military engineering consultants from over 20 different council member governments. The scope of the human counterattack was becoming clear through its indirect effects. While the strikes had been precisely targeted to avoid civilian casualties, they had apparently demonstrated weaknesses in council military infrastructure that demanded immediate attention. The fact that traditionally proud species were seeking outside assistance suggested damage to both capabilities and confidence. In the depths of space between the Orion and Sagittarius arms, the human stealth vessel Shadow's Edge maintained its position in the gravity shadow of a burned-out dwarf star. The ship's advanced sensor arrays monitored hyperspace traffic across a dozen major shipping routes, while remaining effectively invisible to conventional detection methods. Commander Lisa Park reviewed the latest intelligence reports from her network of surveillance vessels with professional satisfaction. The coordinated strike on council infrastructure had exceeded all operational expectations, but, more importantly, it had provided an unprecedented opportunity to evaluate alien response capabilities and decision-making processes. Analysis confirms that most council species operate under tactical doctrines that assume months of preliminary negotiations before any military action, her intelligence officer reported. They were completely unprepared for coordinated strikes without extended diplomatic warning. Commander Park nodded thoughtfully. Their assumption of prolonged escalation patterns worked to our advantage. By the time they realized we weren't following their political playbook, the first phase of operations was already complete. The human approach to warfare reflected fundamental differences in strategic thinking that went beyond simple technological advantages. Where most galactic species had evolved from civilizations with long histories of formal conflict resolution, humanity had emerged from a world where survival often depended on rapid adaptation to changing threats. The Council's elaborate protocols for managing disputes had actually worked against them when faced with an opponent who operated according to different rules. Back in Council space, the Etherian High Counselor Vexthera meditated in the energy fields of her private sanctum. Her translucent form flickered through spectrums of light as she processed the implications of humanity's emergence as a major galactic power. The ancient being had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations, but the human approach presented unique challenges. Most species that achieved significant military capability had followed predictable patterns of expansion and consolidation. They established territory, built defensive infrastructure, and then, attempted to dominate neighboring systems through a combination of economic pressure and military threat. Humanity appeared to be following a completely different model. Instead of seeking to control territory, they had demonstrated the capability to project power across vast distances without maintaining obvious forward bases. Rather than attempting to dominate through economic pressure, they had precisely targeted the infrastructure that enabled such pressure to be applied against them. Most significantly, they had shown the restraint to limit their retaliation to military targets, while simultaneously making it clear that such restraint was a choice, not a limitation. The implications for future Council operations were profound. The traditional tools of galactic diplomacy, economic sanctions, territorial restrictions, and gradual military pressure, had not only failed against humanity, but had apparently provided them with justification for actions that fundamentally altered the balance of power. In the private diplomatic quarters of the Council Station, Ambassador Chun Wei-Lin met with selected representatives from several neutral governments. The meeting was officially described as a cultural exchange session, but everyone present understood its real purpose. The Terran Federation has no territorial ambitions beyond ensuring the security and prosperity of human colonies, Chin stated clearly. We seek peaceful coexistence and mutually beneficial trade relationships with all species willing to respect our sovereignty. Ambassador Thial of the Independent Worlds Confederation leaned forward with obvious interest. And those species that continue to view humanity as a junior member to be managed and controlled? Chin's expression remained diplomatically neutral, but her words carried unmistakable weight. The Terran Federation will continue to respond proportionally to threats against human lives and territory. We believe recent events have adequately demonstrated our commitment to protecting our people and our capabilities in that regard. The careful diplomatic language concealed a reality that every government in the galaxy was beginning to understand. Humanity had announced its arrival as a major power through actions rather than words, and the old assumption that newcomer species could be safely ignored or manipulated had been permanently shattered. The meeting continued for several hours, covering trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and mutual defense considerations. What emerged was a new framework for galactic politics that acknowledged humanity as an equal partner rather than a managed dependency. The species that had spent months plotting ways to control human expansion were now scrambling to establish respectful relationships with a power that had proven capable of striking anywhere in the galaxy without warning. As reports of the diplomatic meetings spread through official and unofficial channels, the broader galactic community began to reassess their understanding of human capabilities and intentions. The species that had destroyed Kepler Station with surgical precision while evacuating all civilians was clearly operating according to rules and principles that demanded respect even from those who might disagree with their methods. The age of treating humanity as a curiosity or minor annoyance had ended definitively. What remained to be seen was whether the established galactic powers would adapt to the new reality or continue to operate under assumptions that had already proven dangerously incorrect. 2 weeks after the Kepler Station incident, the HFY Collective's war-planning chamber buzzed with desperate activity. Fleet Admiral Yithera commanded the Collective's most advanced tactical facility, a massive installation buried deep within the volcanic crust of their homeworld. The chamber's walls displayed real-time holographic representations of ship movements across their entire territory, and the pattern emerging was both humiliating and terrifying. Report, Admiral Yithera commanded. Her serpentine form coiled around the central command platform. The Collective had been the primary architects of the human containment strategy, believing their superior technology and centuries of military experience would ensure easy dominance over the newcomer species. Admiral, we've lost contact with another 3 deep space monitoring stations, Commander Vathon reported, his scales shifting to the muted gray patterns that indicated professional distress. These aren't random strikes. The humans are systematically dismantling our intelligence network in a pattern that suggests they've completely mapped our strategic infrastructure. The tactical displays showed the devastating effectiveness of the human campaign. Rather than engaging in direct fleet confrontations, they had chosen to methodically destroy the Collective's ability to monitor and respond to threats. Communication relays, sensor stations, and logistics hubs had been struck with clockwork precision across dozens of systems. How many ships are they using for these operations? The admiral demanded, trying to identify patterns that might reveal human fleet positions or capabilities. That's the problem, Admiral. Our analysis suggests they're using different vessels for each strike, and none of them match any ship classification in our databases. Either they've been building vessels using completely unknown technology, or they've developed capabilities we never detected. Admiral Ythera's compound eyes focused on the strategic implications. The humans weren't simply retaliating against aggression. They were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that had made the Collective a major galactic power. More disturbing still was the realization that they were apparently capable of replacing their strike vessels faster than the Collective could track and counter them. Meanwhile, in the sprawling industrial complexes of the Terran system, the true scope of human preparation was becoming visible for the first time. The massive shipyards orbiting Earth had been constructed with careful attention to concealing their actual production capacity. What visiting alien dignitaries had been shown as research facilities and prototype development centers were actually full-scale manufacturing operations. Director Amanda Foster walked through the primary assembly bay of Orbital Platform 7, observing the controlled chaos of warship production. The facility operated around the clock, with human workers and sophisticated automation systems collaborating to produce vessels that represented the cutting edge of Terran military technology. Production efficiency is exceeding all projected targets, Chief Engineer Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose careful planning was paying off. We're currently completing one new stealth destroyer every 18 hours, and the heavy cruiser production line will be online within the week. Director Foster nodded approvingly. The industrial buildup had been planned and implemented over a period of years, carefully concealed from alien intelligence services through a combination of compartmentalized construction and deliberate misdirection. While the council members had been focused on political maneuvering, humanity had been preparing for the possibility that their peaceful intentions might not be reciprocated. "What's the status on the new drive systems?" she asked, reviewing production schedules on her handheld tablet. "The quantum slip drives are testing above specifications," Rodriguez replied. "Range and speed are both 20% better than our most optimistic projections. The aliens have no idea we can cross their territory in hours rather than days." The technological achievements represented a fundamental shift in galactic strategic balance. While established species had spent centuries refining existing technologies, humanity had approached engineering challenges from completely different perspectives. The result was capabilities that didn't simply match galactic standards, but exceeded them in unexpected ways. In the diplomatic quarters of the neutral station Harmony Point, representatives from dozens of smaller galactic governments gathered for an emergency conference. The sudden emergence of humanity as a major military power had implications that extended far beyond the immediate conflict with the Council's senior members. "The question before us," announced Coordinator Malthus of the Frontier Alliance, "is whether we attempt to maintain neutrality in this conflict or acknowledge the new political reality and adjust our diplomatic positions accordingly." The assembled delegates represented species and governments that had traditionally been relegated to observer status in galactic politics. They had watched the Council's senior members manipulate trade routes, impose territorial restrictions, and generally treat the galaxy as their private preserve for centuries. The possibility that this dominance might be ending was both exciting and terrifying. The humans have demonstrated military capabilities that suggest they could protect smaller governments from Council retaliation, observed Representative Giancala of the Outer Rim Federation. But can we trust them to respect our sovereignty, or are we simply trading one set of overlords for another? Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin, who had been invited to address the conference, stood to respond to the concerns. Her presence at the gathering was itself a statement about the changing nature of galactic politics. "The Terran Federation seeks partners, not subjects," she stated clearly. "Our conflict with certain council members stems from their attempts to treat us as subjects to be controlled. We have no interest in repeating their mistakes with other species." "Easy words," replied Councillor Thekves of the mining guilds. "But Your military actions suggest capabilities that could easily overwhelm any of our governments. How do we know you won't decide our resources or territory would serve your interests? Chun activated a holographic display showing detailed proposals for mutual defense agreements and trade partnerships. We're offering formal treaties that guarantee territorial sovereignty and include specific limitations on Terran military presence in your space. These agreements include enforcement mechanisms and dispute resolution procedures that ensure our commitments are binding. The proposals represented a completely different approach to galactic politics. Instead of the informal agreements and shifting alliances that characterized council diplomacy, humanity was offering detailed, legally binding commitments that smaller governments could enforce. It was a level of respect for sovereignty that most of them had never experienced from major powers. Back in council space, the Vraxian Empire was discovering that their traditional approach to military planning was inadequate for dealing with human tactics. Admiral Kethvar stood before the Empire's senior military council, explaining why conventional fleet deployments had proven useless against human operations. They refused to engage our main battle fleets, he reported with obvious frustration. Every time we position forces to intercept their strike groups, they simply avoid contact and hit targets elsewhere. Our heavy ships are too slow to catch them, and our fast scouts can't match their stealth capabilities. Defense Minister Yexthara's breathing apparatus whistled with irritation. Surely they must have some vulnerabilities. No military force is invincible. They do have limitations, the Admiral acknowledged. Their fleet appears to be smaller than ours in terms of total tonnage, and they're avoiding direct confrontation with our heaviest units. However, their technological advantages in stealth and speed mean they can choose when and where to engage. They're fighting an asymmetric campaign that plays to their strengths while avoiding ours. The strategic frustration was compounded by political pressure. The Empire's client species were beginning to question whether Vraxian protection was worth the economic costs, especially when that protection had proven ineffective against human strikes. Worse, several client governments had received informal communications suggesting that neutrality in the current conflict would guarantee their safety from human retaliation. The political implications were staggering. For centuries, smaller species had accepted client status with major powers because they believed it was their only option for security. The possibility that neutrality might actually be safer than alliance with traditional powers threatened to unravel the entire system of galactic dominance. On the human colony world of New Geneva, Colonial Administrator Patricia Williams was dealing with a very different sort of problem. The systematic dismantling of the blockade had resulted in a flood of requests from alien governments and organizations seeking to establish diplomatic and trade relationships with humanity. We've received formal applications for embassy status from 47 different governments, her diplomatic aide reported, struggling with the sheer volume of requests. Most of them are offering trade agreements that are significantly more favorable than anything we've seen before. Administrator Williams reviewed the proposals with a mixture of satisfaction and caution. The sudden interest in human friendship was obviously driven by fear rather than genuine respect, but it represented opportunities that had been unthinkable just weeks earlier. What's the analysis on their military capabilities? She asked, understanding that successful diplomacy required accurate threat assessment. Most of the applicant governments maintain minimal military forces and have historically depended on council protection, her security chief replied. They're essentially offering to become human client states in exchange for protection from council retaliation. The irony was not lost on Administrator Williams. The council's attempt to pressure humanity into accepting client status had instead resulted in dozens of other species seeking that exact relationship with the Terran Federation. The difference was that humanity was being asked rather than coerced, and the terms being offered reflected genuine respect for human capabilities. As reports of the diplomatic revolution spread through human space, civilian populations began to understand the true scope of their government's achievements. The species that had spent months living under the threat of economic strangulation and military intervention were now being courted by governments that had previously ignored or dismissed them. The transformation was perhaps most visible in the bustling trade stations that served as neutral meeting points between human and alien space. Where once human merchants had been forced to accept unfavorable terms and limited access to galactic markets, they now found themselves welcomed as preferred partners by species eager to demonstrate their friendship with the Federation. The psychological impact of the military campaign was proving even more significant than its strategic effects. Humanity had not simply demonstrated the capability to defend itself, it had established its credentials as a species that others sought as allies rather than feared as threats. The careful restraint shown in targeting only military infrastructure while protecting civilian populations had earned respect even from traditional opponents. As the third week of the crisis began, it was becoming clear that the galactic political landscape had been permanently altered. The question was no longer whether humanity could be controlled or contained, but how the established powers would adapt to a galaxy where their traditional dominance was no longer guaranteed. The secure conference room aboard the Council flagship Eternal Authority hosted the most critical meeting in galactic history. High Counselor Vexthera materialized at the head of the crystalline table, her ancient Etherian form flickering with energy patterns that betrayed deep concern. Around her, the senior leadership of 6 major council powers gathered to address a crisis that threatened to unravel centuries of carefully maintained political control. The situation has exceeded all projections, announced Intelligence Director Korthmel of the Hegemony Alliance, his massive frame hunched over tactical displays showing human fleet movements across the galaxy. Our latest analysis suggests that human military capabilities may actually exceed those of any individual council member. Their coordination and technological advantages have proven decisive in every engagement. Admiral Ythera of the HFY Collective gestured toward holographic reports detailing the systematic destruction of their intelligence network. They've demonstrated the ability to strike simultaneously across dozens of systems while maintaining perfect operational security. Our response fleets arrive at target locations hours after the attacks are completed, and we've yet to achieve even visual contact with a human strike force. The scope of the intelligence failure was becoming staggering. For months, Council intelligence services had been tracking what they believed to be the entirety of human military assets. The coordinated strikes had revealed that they had been observing perhaps 10% of actual human capabilities, and even that estimate might be optimistic. More concerning than their military assets, interjected Councillor Thekmore, is the political response from neutral governments. We're receiving reports that over 60 independent systems have requested security agreements with the Terran Federation. They're offering the humans everything we've been trying to extract through pressure and intimidation. High Counselor Vexthera processed this information with the wisdom of 2 centuries of political experience. The emergence of humanity as a galactic power was forcing smaller species to choose sides, and they were overwhelmingly choosing the newcomers over the established order. The implications for council authority were devastating. "What are our options?" she asked, though her tone suggested she suspected the answer would be unsatisfactory. Defense Minister Yexthera of the Vraxian Empire activated detailed projections showing potential military responses. Full-scale military action would require coordinating the fleets of all 6 major powers, and would likely result in casualties numbering in the millions. Success is not guaranteed, and failure would effectively end council authority over galactic affairs. Alternatively, she continued, we could attempt to negotiate a new political framework that acknowledges human capabilities while preserving our existing territorial and economic interests. This would require significant concessions, but might prevent further escalation. The third option remained unspoken, but obvious to everyone present. Complete capitulation to human demands would preserve lives and infrastructure, but would effectively end the Council's role as the dominant force in galactic politics. For species that had controlled interstellar affairs for centuries, such an outcome was almost unthinkable. Meanwhile, in the Advanced Command Center of the human battleship Indomitable, Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun reviewed the strategic situation with her senior staff. The vessel represented the pinnacle of human military engineering, its quantum stealth systems, and advanced weaponry concealed within a hull design that appeared conventional to alien observers. Phase 2 objectives have been achieved ahead of schedule, reported Intelligence Chief Commander Park. Council intelligence networks in all targeted systems have been neutralized, and their rapid response capabilities have been reduced by approximately 70%. More importantly, we've successfully demonstrated that their technological advantages are not as significant as they believed. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. The campaign had been designed not simply to inflict damage, but to psychological effect that would force a fundamental reassessment of human capabilities. The careful precision of each strike had been calculated to demonstrate superior technology, while the coordination of simultaneous operations showed organizational abilities that exceeded Council expectations. "What's the status on diplomatic contacts with neutral governments?" she asked, understanding that military success meant nothing without political follow-through. "Overwhelmingly positive," replied her diplomatic liaison. "The combination of demonstrated military capability and carefully restrained targeting has convinced most neutral species that we represent a viable alternative to Council dominance. We're receiving more requests for formal agreements than our diplomatic corps can process." The success of the diplomatic campaign was perhaps more significant than the military victories. By demonstrating both strength and restraint, humanity had positioned itself as a protector of smaller species rather than a conqueror. The contrast with traditional Council methods of expansion and control was stark and effective. Back on Earth, President Maria Santos convened an emergency session of the Terran Security Council to review the global implications of humanity's emergence as a galactic power. The massive chamber beneath the Geneva complex hosted representatives from every major human government and military organization. "The campaign has exceeded all strategic objectives," reported Secretary of Defense William Hayes. "Council military capabilities have been significantly degraded, their intelligence networks have been compromised, and political support for continued aggression appears to be collapsing. More importantly, we've achieved these results without significant human casualties and minimal collateral damage." President Santos understood that the military success was only the beginning of a much larger challenge. What are the long-term implications? "We've demonstrated that we can defend ourselves and retaliate against aggression, but can we maintain this position without becoming the very thing we've been fighting against?" Secretary of State Jennifer Liu activated displays showing proposed political frameworks for post-conflict galactic governance. "We have an opportunity to reshape galactic politics around principles of sovereignty and mutual respect rather than dominance and exploitation. However, this will require careful management of our newfound position as a major power." The philosophical challenge was significant. Humanity had achieved military and political prominence through superior technology and strategic thinking, but maintaining that position while avoiding the corruption that had characterized previous galactic powers would require unprecedented restraint and wisdom. In the distant Andromeda research facility, human scientists were making discoveries that would soon render the current conflict's strategic calculations obsolete. Dr. Elena Vasquez reviewed test results from experimental technologies that represented quantum leaps beyond current galactic standards. "The new drive systems are testing at efficiency levels that were theoretically impossible 6 months ago," she reported to her research team. "If these results hold true, we'll be capable of crossing galactic distances in time frames that make current strategic thinking irrelevant." Her colleague, Dr. James Wright, highlighted even more revolutionary developments. "The defensive applications are equally significant. We're looking at energy shielding capabilities that could render conventional weapons entirely ineffective. Combined with our stealth advances, we may be approaching true military invulnerability." The implications were staggering. While the current conflict had been fought using technology that was superior but recognizable, the next generation of human capabilities would operate on principles that other species might not even comprehend. The gap between human and alien technology was not merely widening. It was becoming qualitatively different. Back in Council space, the political ramifications of the human campaign were creating cascading effects throughout the established order. On the Vraxian homeworld, emergency sessions of the Imperial Senate were debating whether to continue supporting Council policies that had proven disastrously ineffective. "The humans have demonstrated that Council protection is worthless," declared Senator Yithvel, her statement causing murmurs of agreement throughout the chamber. Our client species are abandoning us for agreements with the Terran Federation, and our own military has proven inadequate against their capabilities. Perhaps it's time to acknowledge that the old order is dead. The debate reflected broader questions that were being asked on dozens of worlds throughout Council space. The assumption that established powers were inherently superior to newcomers had been shattered, and the political implications were radiating outward like shockwaves from the original conflict. Emperor Kethera himself appeared before the Senate to address the crisis. His ancient form commanded respect even in the current chaos, and his words carried the weight of centuries of imperial tradition. The Vraxian Empire has survived for over a millennium by adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining our core principles, he declared. The emergence of humanity as a galactic power represents such a change. We can either adapt to the new reality or face extinction as a relevant political force. The Emperor's statement effectively acknowledged what many had begun to suspect. The age of unquestioned council dominance was ending, and the choice facing established powers was between negotiated coexistence and gradual irrelevance. Similar discussions were taking place throughout the galaxy as governments, military leaders, and civilian populations grappled with the implications of humanity's demonstration of power. The species that had seemed like manageable newcomers just weeks earlier had revealed themselves to be technological and military equals of the galaxy's most established civilizations. As the fourth week of the crisis began, the fundamental question was no longer whether humanity could be controlled or contained. Instead, the galaxy was being forced to confront the possibility that the careful balance of power that had maintained stability for centuries was being permanently altered by a species that operated according to completely different principles and capabilities. The old assumptions about technological progress, military strategy, and political control were proving inadequate for understanding human capabilities and intentions. What remained to be seen was whether the established galactic powers possessed the wisdom and flexibility to adapt to a new reality where their traditional advantages no longer guaranteed 6 weeks after the Kepler Station incident. The Great Assembly of the Galactic Council convened for the most significant session in its 1,000-year history. The massive crystalline chamber had been reconfigured to accommodate representatives from over 300 species, including dozens of governments that had never before been granted speaking privileges. The political transformation of the galaxy was becoming visible in the very structure of the gathering. High Counselor Vexthera materialized at the center of the chamber, her ancient Etherian form pulsing with energy patterns that reflected both solemnity and resignation. Around her, the assembled delegates represented not just the traditional power structure of galactic civilization, but the new alliances and relationships that had emerged from humanity's dramatic intervention in galactic politics. We gather today to formalize the new Treaty of Galactic Cooperation, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. The events of recent weeks have demonstrated that our previous approaches to interstellar governance require fundamental revision. The new treaty framework acknowledges the sovereignty of all member species and establishes mechanisms for dispute resolution that do not rely on economic coercion or military intimidation. The treaty represented a complete reversal of the principles that had governed galactic politics for centuries. Instead of the hierarchical system that had allowed senior council members to dictate terms to smaller species, the new framework established genuine equality among all members and created binding limitations on the use of economic or military pressure to resolve disputes. Admiral Kethvar of the Vraxian Empire stood to address the assembly, his 6 eyes reflecting the difficulty of accepting the new reality. The Vraxian Empire formally acknowledges the military and technological capabilities of the Terran Federation and pledges to honor their sovereignty and territorial integrity. We further commit to the principles of mutual respect and non-interference that will govern future interstellar relations. The statement represented a profound humiliation for a species that had considered itself inherently superior to humanity just months earlier. However, the alternative to acceptance had become clear through weeks of systematic demonstration of human capabilities. The choice was between negotiated equality and potential irrelevance. One by one, the representatives of the major council powers made similar statements. The Zephyrian Collective formally renounced their territorial claims in human space. The Hegemony Alliance agreed to compensation for damages caused by their blockade operations. Each acknowledgement represented the end of assumptions and privileges that had defined galactic politics for generations. The human approach to conflict resolution, observed Counselor Thylos of the Nagan Confederation, has proven more effective than centuries of traditional diplomacy. Their ability to combine military precision with strategic restraint has achieved political objectives that appeared impossible through conventional means. Ambassador Chen stood to address the assembly for the first time as a representative of an acknowledged major power. The Terran Federation seeks a galaxy where differences are resolved through negotiation rather than coercion, where technological advancement benefits all species rather than creating tools for oppression, and where sovereignty is respected regardless of a civilization's age or size. She activated holographic displays showing the proposed structure for future galactic governance. We propose a federation of equals, with rotating leadership and decision-making processes that require genuine consensus rather than the dominance of established powers. Military forces will be limited to defensive purposes, and economic agreements will be based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. The proposals represented everything the smaller galactic species had hoped for but never dared demand. For centuries, they had accepted client status and limited autonomy because they believed it was their only option for survival. The emergence of humanity as a protecting power had created possibilities that had previously existed only in theoretical discussions. Representative Giancala of the Outer Rim Federation spoke for dozens of smaller governments. The events of recent weeks have demonstrated that technological and military superiority need not translate into political oppression. The Terran Federation's restraint in victory and commitment to genuine partnership offer hope for a galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. The political implications extended far beyond the immediate participants. Throughout the galaxy, species that had never considered themselves capable of independent action were beginning to assert their rights and interests. The human example had proven that established hierarchies could be challenged successfully, and the psychological impact was as significant as any military victory. In the Vraxian Imperial Palace, Emperor Kethera met privately with his senior advisors to discuss the Empire's future in the new galactic order. The ancient ruler had witnessed centuries of political change, but the speed and completeness of humanity's transformation of galactic politics was unprecedented in his experience. Our analysis suggests that human technological capabilities continue to advance at rates that exceed all previous galactic examples, reported Chief Science Advisor Velthera. Their research and development operations appear to be producing breakthrough discoveries on a monthly basis. If current trends continue, they will achieve technological supremacy that makes military resistance impossible within a standard year. The Emperor's compound eyes focused on strategic projections that showed the potential future balance of power. Then, our choice is to find honorable partnership with the humans or face eventual technological obsolescence. The traditional path of attempting to contain or control superior civilizations is no longer viable. Moreover, added Imperial Chancellor Yex Mora, the economic benefits of cooperation with the Terran Federation appear to exceed anything we achieved through our previous methods of resource extraction. Human trade proposals offer genuine mutual benefit rather than the zero-sum competitions that characterized our relationships with other powers. The economic transformation was perhaps as significant as the political changes. Human technological capabilities had created opportunities for advancement and prosperity that surpassed the extractive relationships that had defined galactic commerce. Species that had been relegated to providing raw materials for more advanced civilizations were being offered partnerships in advanced manufacturing and technological development. On Earth, President Santos addressed a joint session of the Global Parliament to explain the long-term implications of humanity's emergence as a galactic power. The chamber was packed with representatives from every nation and territory on the planet, all seeking to understand how their world's relationship with the galaxy had been fundamentally altered. "We have achieved something unprecedented in galactic history," she declared. "We have used superior military capabilities to create a more just and equitable political system rather than simply replacing one form of oppression with another. This achievement brings both tremendous opportunities and equally tremendous responsibilities." Secretary of Defense Hayes presented detailed analyses of the new security environment. "Our technological advantages continue to expand, but our greatest protection comes from the political alliances we've formed with species that share our commitment to sovereignty and mutual respect. We have become the protecting power for dozens of civilizations that had never previously experienced genuine political independence." The responsibility was staggering. Humanity had not simply defended itself against aggression. It had become the guarantor of a new galactic political order based on principles that many species had never experienced. The success or failure of this experiment would determine whether advanced civilizations could coexist peacefully or whether technological superiority inevitably led to oppression. In research facilities throughout human space, scientists and engineers continued their work on technologies that would further revolutionize galactic civilization. The quantum communication networks that enabled instantaneous coordination across galactic distances were being expanded to include allied species. Medical technologies that could extend lifespans and eliminate genetic diseases were being shared with governments that committed to the new cooperative frameworks. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the Global Science Council to present discoveries that would have seemed like fantasy just months earlier. "We have achieved controllable manipulation of space-time that allows for travel speeds approaching instantaneous transit across galactic distances. More significantly, we've developed defensive technologies that could protect entire star systems from conventional weapons." The implications were clear. Humanity was not simply maintaining its technological edge. It was achieving capabilities that would render traditional concepts of military power and territorial control completely obsolete. The question was whether these advances would be used to benefit galactic civilization or to establish an even more complete form of dominance than had ever existed before. As the new treaty was formally signed by representatives from across the galaxy, the assembled delegates understood that they were witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic stability through a combination of competition and coercion had been replaced by something entirely new. The humans had demonstrated that it was possible to use superior capabilities to create a more just and equitable system rather than simply replacing one set of oppressors with another. Whether this experiment in cooperative galactic governance would succeed remained to be seen, but the old assumptions about the inevitability of technological dominance leading to political oppression had been permanently shattered. The galaxy that emerged from the crisis would be fundamentally different from the one that had existed before humanity's arrival. The question was whether the new order would prove stable enough to survive the challenges that would inevitably arise as other species began to achieve technological capabilities that rivaled human advances. For the first time in galactic history, the answer to that question would be determined not by the strongest civilization imposing its will on the weakest, but by the collective wisdom and commitment to cooperation of hundreds of species working together as equals. The true test of humanity's achievement would be whether it could maintain the principles that had guided its rise to power even as its technological and military advantages continued to grow beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen.